Okay, so hello, my name is Colin Clark, and I am presenting, or I'm doing my final presentation on the something very different than what I originally planned. I'm going to be looking at Buddhist themes in Chuck Palahniuk's novel Fight Club. So Fight Club is a novel from the 90s written by Chuck Palahniuk that explores man's um, sort of, how can I best express this? His quest for meaning. Um, and it possesses many similarities to Buddhism. And now I know what you're thinking. How can a novel, uh, excuse me, one second. Here we go. So I know what you're thinking. How can a novel called Fight Club, and that is about fighting, be in any way Buddhist? Doesn't that contradict the very first of the five precepts of Buddhism, of doing no harm to others? And what about ahisma, nonviolence? And also, how is fighting compassionate, tolerant, and how does it show any form of kindness? Well, that's what we're about to get into. So I feel like it's necessary to give a brief synopsis of the plot before we move on. So Fight Club is about a nameless narrator in his 30s who comes to realize the futility of life as he's been living it. He works a job that he dislikes in order to buy things that he neither needs nor really wants, and his entire identity is wrapped up in these material possessions. Um, his job is um is something that is almost, it sucks the life out of him, and it's really his only thing in life. He has no spirituality, and he feels completely drained by this job. What's more, he is utterly controlled by forces outside of himself, such as his boss, bills he must pay, expectations of society that he must fulfill. And he sort of suffers an existential crisis upon awakening to the fact that his entire identity is made up of these possessions, and that his life is slowly dwindling away by working this soulless job. And so he comes to regard life as meaningless, and which, in other words, means that he is suffering greatly. So what happens then is he dreams up this imaginary figure or an ideal of someone whom he would like to be, or whom he would like to become. And this figure is a fringe society figure who rejects materialism, consumerism, and Western social mores, um, and is a destructive figure in a sense, but is destructive in a way that signals transformation. He wants to destroy his former self in order to become something better. And this sort of speaks to the idea that the Buddhist idea of anatman, that identity is constantly in flux, and also that the Buddhist idea that it is really up to us to alter our lives for the better. And so he then establishes, the narrator establishes an underground fight club where other disillusioned men go to fight one another, literally fight one another, physical altercations. But this fighting is so that they can overcome desire, for example, for health, for beauty, for to look good, because when you fight, you obviously destroy your physical appearance. And it also enables these men to break through the illusion of a stable, never-changing identity, because they are always finding out new things about themselves by getting involved in physical altercations. And finally, the ultimate goal of Fight Club is to achieve enlightenment so as to navigate their chaotic world in a Zen-like state, unafraid and undisturbed by things that do not matter. It is sort of like it is meditation in a sense. It's just meditation through a means that is not totally in alignment with Buddhism, for it is inherently violent. Um, and then the rest of the novel details our nameless narrator striving to live up to this ideal person, this alter ego whom he has invented, and who, in contrast to him, actually has a name, has an identity. However, that identity is always in flux, but at least he starts out with an identity. And this ideal person that the narrator strives to become, or whom the narrator strives to become, is unconcerned with mass accumulation of things and corporate America. He focuses instead on spiritual development and character building through the endurance of pain and hardship. And you might even say, you might even say that the activities that are engaged in Fight Club, where two men fight each other, is a Taoist flow activity, where there is no effort to cause a certain outcome. As we'll later see, the book Fight Club talks about how fighting in Fight Club is not about winning or losing. It's merely about being completely immersed in the current moment. And another reason why these men fight is because they feel as though modern corporate America has emasculated them to such a degree that the only way to regain their masculinity is by resorting to a very primal activity, such as, well, fighting. And let's go on to the next slide. So here are a couple parallels or similarities of the narrator's awakening to that of the original Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. So both come to believe in the futility of life as they have been living it, and both are suffering tremendously and encounter suffering everywhere they go. And then both embark upon a spiritual journey to overcome desire, suffering, and fulfill their true purpose in life. In the case of our nameless narrator, this is to become his alter ego. Then we have another similarity is that both discover a way of life that is intended to help others and establish community. As the narrator of Fight Club sets up this underground Fight Club in order to give men back their sense of purpose or their sense of power in the world. And also it establishes a group community among them. And then both Siddhartha Gautama and our narrator believe the power for self-fulfillment comes from within and through the overcoming or renunciation of worldly desires. Fight Club is very much about giving up and letting go of material possessions, of desired outcomes, of, for example, of desired outcomes, and just letting go and letting things happen as they happen. So it also very much incorporates the Taoist belief of non-interaction, meaning that one puts in effort, but does not worry about the results of a certain thing. And then both discover that identity is something fluid and that man's troubles rest in the mind. And the fighting in Fight Club is mainly an effort to calm the mind. In other words, it is a very violent form of meditation. Um, and moving on, we have the 5 precepts or moral code of Buddhism, which is somewhat hard to. Some of these precepts don't jive very well with the novel Fight Club, especially number 1, the refraining from killing any living beings. There is no killing in the novel. That said, there is violence and harming of other human beings. However, it is very consensual violence. These men fight in order to regain their sense of power, as they have been emasculated by working soulless jobs for the mere sake of consumerism. All the other precepts, however, are observed in Fight Club. There is no stealing. Sexual misconduct does not exist. There is a love relationship between the narrator and a woman named Marla Singer. However, it is very much consensual, and it is a monogamous relationship. And there is no line in Fight Club. Fight Club is really about seeing through delusion and stopping lying to oneself. And so that very much jives with the teachings of Buddhism. And then also there is no intoxicants within the book. It is the book is all about achieving enlightenment through meditative means. And although the meditation here is something very different than traditional Buddhism, it is still something that rejects mind-altering substances. Then moving on, we have the 4 noble truths of suffering, which is that all life entails suffering, which is something that the narrator of Fight Club realizes and opens up to. He realizes that his life is full of suffering, and that so are the lives of countless other individuals in the world, and that there is a way out of this. And he also realizes that the desire for material possessions, mainly material possessions, is the cause of suffering. He owns so many things and is so obsessed with accumulating things to fill some type of void within him that he ultimately loses himself, and actually says later in the novel that the things that he owned came to own him. His possessions came to possess him. And he ultimately comes to the conclusion that the renunciation of desire is the end of suffering. Once one stops ceasing, for example, the desire for good health, for the acquisition of material possessions, one stops to suffer entirely. And the narrator ultimately comes to this conclusion and attempts, just as a bodhisattva would, to bring others to this realization. In other words, helping others to achieve nirvana while he himself becomes enlightened. And then we have the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the 4th of the Noble Truths. And all of these are visible within Fight Club. So we have morality in Fight Club. It's a rejection of the morality in Fight Club is a rejection of corporate American reality and consumerism. So Yes. So I'm sorry, I'm a little tired right now, but I'm trying to make it through this. Um, and 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 then we have meditation, which for the narrator primarily involves uh, being an active participant in this community of disillusioned young men who, through pain and suffering and the endurance of that, um, reach a meditative state and and get closer and closer to enlightenment and a position or a philosophical stance that enables them to meet the world with serenity or meet calamity with serenity. Then we have the cultivation of prajna, or wisdom or insight, and this is very visible in Fight Club. It is, the narrator is on a relentless quest to see through things, to see the true nature of things, and to find out what is truly important in life. And next slide. So these are quotes from the novel, and I will read them and then explain how I believe that they jive or correlate with Buddhist teachings. So, uh, and I'm not sure if I will be able to get through all of them, as I think I may have overdone it a little bit, but I'll see how far I can get. So, um, our first quote describes work in modern society. And the narrator says that you pull a lever, you push a button, you don't understand any of it, and then you just die. What he's basically pointing to is the meaningless spiritual, the meaninglessness of modern existence without any spirituality. And our second quote is, when you see how everything you can ever accomplish will end up as trash, anything you're ever proud of will be thrown away, and I'm lost inside. What the narrator is basically talking about here is the impermanence of everything, and especially material possessions. And then we have, this is when I'd cry, because right now your life comes down to nothing. And not even nothing, but oblivion. It's easy to cry when you realize that everyone you love will reject you or die. On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone will drop to zero. So here, the narrator is very much endorsing this philosophy of non-attachment to people and things. For all people and things are impermanent. They will eventually die. And if we are attached to them, then we get suffering as a result when they eventually do leave us. And I think I'll skip this one and read this one instead. So this is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. So this is sort of the beginning of the narrator's awakening. He realizes that he is not fulfilling his purpose in life, that the job that he is working, the thing that takes up most of his time, is merely running out the clock of his life. And this is something that very much disturbs him, and he would like to change this. Then we have a quote about Marla Singer, his love relationship in the novel. And it talks about how she comes to grips with death, and how, with coming to grips with death, she actually gains a fuller appreciation of life itself. So the quote is, all her life, she never saw a dead person. There was no real sense of life because she had nothing to contrast it with. Oh, but now there was dying and death and loss and grief, weeping and shuddering, terror and remorse. Now that she knows where we're all going, Marla feels every moment of her life. So this describes someone else's enlightenment, and it comes through realizing that life is impermanent, which is necessary in Buddhism to achieve nirvana. Buddhism is different from Hinduism in that in Hinduism one becomes enlightened or achieves liberation from moksha by grasping the immortality of their soul. And while Buddhism, or because Buddhism rejects the idea of a never-changing soul, one becomes liberated from moksha by grasping their mortality, the fact that they will one day die. And so this right here describes someone else's enlightenment or liberation from moksha. After having seen death, they then come to a new appreciation for life and its beauty. And then this next quote is talking about the narrator's idea about material possessions and how much emphasis and how much importance he placed in these material possessions prior to establishing Fight Club and thus meditating and thus becoming less and less concerned with worldly things, so to speak. So it took my whole life to buy this stuff. You buy furniture. You tell yourself, this is the last sofa I will ever need in my life. Buy the sofa. Then for a couple years, you're satisfied that no matter what goes wrong, at least you've got your sofa issue handled. Then the right set of dishes. Then the perfect bed, the drapes, the rug. Then you're trapped in your lovely nest, and the things you used to own, now they own you. So I think what's really important about this is that the narrator has realized that this desire for things is insatiable. You can never have enough. There's always more to have. You buy a sofa, and then that problem is solved, but each desire is followed by a new desire. The fulfillment of one desire merely leads to a new desire. And so the narrator realizes that the renunciation of desire for material possessions is actually what is going to set him free in life. And I really love this line here, that the things you used to own, now they own you. So what he's really advocating here is an austere existence, not amassing material possessions. Yes, and let's move on to our next slide. And so then the narrator talks about the consequences of not being enlightened or never becoming enlightened and always chasing things. And this quote is, a lot of young people try to impress the world and buy too many things. A lot of young people don't know what they really want. If you don't know what you want, you end up with a lot you don't. Sorry, the lights just went out on me. There we go. And so what this is really highlighting is that if one goes around mindlessly through the world, they will eventually make their lives terrible. And through the accumulation of things that they neither need nor want, they will eventually wake up with a house or an apartment full of just garbage, useless, meaningless possessions. So the narrator says to himself, and I think that this really speaks to the Buddhist concept of anatman, and also the fact that identity is always in flux. He says to himself, may I never be complete, may I never be content, may I never be perfect. Deliver me from being perfect and complete. And this also is sort of Taoist, I believe, in the sense that he is not striving. He is not striving for anything. He has no goal. I read in Hermann Hesse's novel Siddhartha, which is a fantastic read, and is a loose biography on the life of Siddhartha Gautama, that that one should stop searching for in all the time we spend searching, we never find the time for finding. And searching means always having a goal, whereas finding means not having a goal. And I think that this passage here is speaking to that. The narrator is not striving for perfection. He is not striving to be content, and he is not striving to be complete. He is merely letting things pass without interfering. And then this describes what Fight Club does for a person. And I think the similarities between what a night in Fight Club does for a person is very similar to what meditation does for practicing Buddhists. So after a night in Fight Club, everything in the real world gets the volume turned down. And excuse me for the poor language here, but nothing can piss you off. Your word is law. And if other people break that law or question you, even that doesn't piss you off. Nothing is static. Even the Mona Lisa is falling apart. Since Fight Club, I can wiggle half the teeth in my jaw. So here the narrator is talking about how after Fight Club, he is transported into an almost Zen-like state where worldly concerns and things of the world no longer bother him. He also references impermanence here. Nothing is static. Even the Mona Lisa is falling apart. So things that we would like to think will always be around are slowly decaying before us. And what's really interesting is that the narrator is accepting his mortality here by in essence voluntarily destroying his body, or not destroying, perhaps that's too strong a word, but voluntarily testing the limits of his body to find its weaknesses, and also accepting the fact that that may mean that he may actually get hurt in the process of doing so. But in doing so, he is also overcoming fear of getting hurt, which in itself is the renunciation of desire, the desire for safety, the desire for certainty, the desire for good health. The narrator is renouncing all these things. And then so later, he talks more about what one gains in Fight Club. You aren't alive anywhere like you're alive at Fight Club. Fight Club isn't about winning or losing fights. You see a guy come to Fight Club for the first time, and he's as tough as a wad of cookie dough. You see the same guy here 6 months later, and he looks carved out of wood. This guy trusts himself to handle anything. So similar to meditation, the experience of Fight Club and facing what one fears, physical violence, transforms a person and gives them an overwhelming sense of self-confidence, and actually enables them to go out in the world and face calamity with serenity. And it's also just a gorgeous line that he looks carved out of wood. This guy trusts himself to handle anything. And so, yes, let me continue on. So this is the narrator reflecting back on the time before his, before his enlightenment or revelation. And he says that at the time, my life just seemed too complete. And maybe we have to break everything to make something better out of ourselves. So here we have the narrator basically saying that um, that through destruction of something we transform, and he's talking about transformation. Now he's talking about losing everything in order to become transformed, which is very similar to what happened to Siddhartha Gautama. He basically rejected his life of luxury in order to live a very austere, harsh existence that nearly killed him. And that experience of extreme suffering ultimately made something better out of him. The narrator is expressing the same idea here. And then this next line, most guys are at Fight Club because of something they are too scared to fight. After a few fights, you're afraid a lot less. So this talks about the practicality of Fight Club and what it actually gives the people who participate in it. They go there as very insecure, demoralized, scared men, and they come out with a not a glowing self-confidence, but more faith in themselves to handle the world and to not be disturbed by things in the world which do not matter. And I think I'll skip these few because I think I'm running out of time. This is a great line. It's only after you've lost everything that you're free to do anything. That's also very Buddhist and very much correlates with the experience of Siddhartha Gautama, who lost his life of luxury and then became enlightened and gave the world a philosophy to navigate the world and all of its inherent suffering. Let me, I realize now that I've added a few too many quotes, but let me just read this one too and comment on it briefly. So even after a week after Fight Club, you've got no problem driving inside the speed limit. Maybe you've got internal injuries, but you are so cool. Other cars drive around you. Total strangers hate you. It's absolutely nothing personal. After Fight Club, you're so relaxed and you just cannot care. So here, the narrator is talking about the effects of meditation and calming the mind. The world basically gets the volume turned down, as mentioned earlier. Things that don't matter, such as traffic, someone tailgating you, whatever. These are things that after one has experienced the meditative practice of Fight Club, one is able to truly let slide and basically approach the world in a totally Zen state. And then this is what someone says in the opening of Fight Club at one of their meetings. So we want you, not your money, which is totally contrary to the way of the real world or the regular world or corporate America. What matters here is the person, the individual. As long as you're at Fight Club, you're not how much money you've got in the bank. You're not your job. You're not your family. And you're not who you tell yourself. You're not your problems. You're not your age. So this again is going back to Anatman and a sense of emptiness. And emptiness does not mean nothingness in Buddhism, but it is the ability to not let any one thing define one's entire identity. And then Palahniuk who is the author of the book, poses the question, a very deep philosophical question: what will you wish you'd done before you died? And that is obviously not having worked in a cubicle to make someone else rich and amass um, coffee tables from IKEA and clever dishes with or coffee mugs with ironic sayings on them and countless t-shirts and a great wardrobe. It's something deeper than that. It's obviously um, in this case, in the case of the narrator, to help other men to achieve their full potential and approach the world with less timidity. And so then the final quote that I selected from here is, I'll read it and then comment on it. So you have a class of young, strong men and women, and they want to give their lives to something. Advertising has these people chasing cars and clothes they don't need. Generations have been working in jobs they hate just so they can buy what they don't really need. We don't have a great war in our generation or a Great Depression, but we do have a great war of the spirit. The Great Depression is our lives. We have a spiritual depression. So this again goes back to the fact that this novel is really spiritual in nature. It's all about finding a path out of the suffering of modernity. And the modern idea that one's possessions define a person, one's job defines a person, one's bank account defines a person, and these are the things that matter. The novel is really about one, rejecting timidity, rejecting the sort of subjugation of the individual that the workforce demands, and also finding one's meaning in life and finding a way to live that lends serenity in our very chaotic world. And I know that this may seem strange that the way they accomplish this is through fighting one another. That said, these are consensual fights, and the men do this in order to encounter their deepest fears and overcome them in order to go back out in the world and basically have non-interaction with the world and just let things happen and not be disturbed by them. So it is similar to Buddhism, a self-help program, you could say, or similar to a self-help program. It's a philosophical stance of how to approach a world awash with suffering. That's how I would best describe it. And I believe that Fight Club and Buddhism are very much able to, or that it is very much a possibility to give a Buddhist reading of Fight Club. Most literary critics focus on the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, or also the Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. But I think that viewing this novel through the lens of Buddhism is equally as rewarding, and it is also something that is not done very frequently. It was very difficult to find secondary literature dealing with the topic of Buddhism within Fight Club. And then these are my works cited, and that is the end of my presentation. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I apologize for my sort of stuttering throughout. It's a little late at night. I'm a little tired. Probably should have done this in an earlier point, but this is when I got around to it. But thank you so much, Dr. Hoon, for everything. And yeah, I anticipate visiting your temple even after this class. And so thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention. Goodbye.